Ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, welcome to another episode of Let's Talk Comics. I am your host, Jim Biscardi, and this is the podcast that goes one-on-one with your favorite creators in the business about how they got into comics, why they got into comics, and what it takes to stay in comics. Then, at the very end, we talk about a new project they've got coming up. My guest today is the first in this run that I've been doing that kind of ties up a loose end, in a sense. We now have experienced a full creative team. My guest today is Mahmud Asrar, who has a book coming out with Jason Aaron, Bug Wars from Image Comics. And Mahmud is such an interesting story, a fascinating story in the sense where Mahmud was born in Turkey, then moved to Austria, where he lives now, and so his experience in kind of breaking in, especially in those early 2000 years, where I think you've heard me mention it quite a bit, where the online community was just different than it is today. I'm not saying it was any better or any worse. It was just different, and so he came up in a class where that was how a lot of artists got noticed that were sort of in his era. And so he's also another person who did a little work here and there. And then his first project was a creator-owned project. It was Dynamo 5 at Image with Jay Ferber. And then from there, he had the rocket strap attached to his back and he was sent to the moon. He has worked on redefining the X-Men to then finding, his collaborator in Jason in Conan, and kind of, I would say, bringing Conan back to a more mainstream place than I think Conan had been up until that point. Yes, there were a lot of Conan fans and things like that, but for the newer audience that maybe had come in over the last 10 or so years, Conan wasn't really on their radar. But put Jason Aaron, put Mahmud Asrar on the book, and you've got a hit. And so to hear how that translates into what they had coming and what they were cooking up for Bug Wars, and what the difference is when working on a project like Conan versus a project like Bug Wars is really interesting. So with that said, I think we're just going to jump right into it. This, depending on when you're listening to this, if you're listening to this in real time, it's going to be a busy week of Let's Talk Comics. So I hope you have the opportunity to listen to the few episodes that are coming out. If you're not listening to this in real time, well, just know that this was a crazy period in time for the show. Thank you, everyone who has supported the show so far. I'll give you all the thanks, and I'll read the user reviews on iTunes and Spotify at the end, so stay tuned if you want a free Let's Talk Comics sticker. But enough babbling on. If you're ready, I'm ready. Let's talk comics. Mahmud, welcome.
Hey, Jim. Nice to speak to you.
Yeah, it's so interesting when I started doing some of the background research stuff for you, I totally forgot that you were part of that class of creators who had kind of come out of digital webbing, because it's one of the digital webbing is one of those things that it feels like there's nothing really like it today in a sense, but it was a huge kind of jumping off point, or at least getting work recognized for a lot of people who kind of came up in your group. Do you remember just kind of what those, I know we're going back a ways there, but just even as a young artist trying to break in, how important was something like that as a venue for you to get your work out?
That was just amazing to have discovered digital webbing. Back in those days, I was trying everything. I made a website on GeoCities. I go way back. So yeah, I did all the kind of stuff, all kind of message boards and stuff. Then I heard about digital webbing, and I looked and I noticed all these people who are just like me from all over the world, trying to do the same thing, getting to connect with others, trying to find out how things work, and just break in. And, it was just an eye-opening experience for me, seeing all these other people and getting to interact and making friends. and it was also the actually inception of my international career, because I started getting published because of digital webbing.
Mm-hmm. So for you, correct me if I'm wrong, you grew up in Turkey and then moved quite a bit ago. You're now in Austria, in Vienna.
Right.
So for you, early on, was it an art career something that you felt pretty resolute on doing early on, or is there an alternate universe somewhere where Mahmud is a banker or something?
I hope not. No, the thing is, like, yeah, I was fixated on making a living doing what I love.
Sure.
And that kind of, changed a bit, when I was younger. So, like, when I was in my earlier teens, I wanted to be an illustrator, a painter for
Mm-hmm.
fantasy stuff, like book covers and things like that. But I mean, comics was always in my background. I always read comics. I grew up with comics. I always wanted to do comics.
Mm-hmm.
And then, like I was all for a short period of time, I wanted to do some gaming stuff and whatever. But, like my main goal was always comics,
Mm-hmm.
so that was my end goal, and I had to do that. And, like everything I did was for that,
Right.
so I got education, which was a stepping stone for me to learn how to do this better. I
Mm-hmm.
studied graphic design for a bit, thought it was not ideal work for me, so I studied animation, which was the closest thing to comics that I could find. So I studied animation. I graduated. I never made animation because that was my stepping stone.
Sure.
So I learned all the basics and storytelling and all kind of stuff at school from that. But from there, like I started making my own comics and stuff like that. And
Right. So what were some of your, I guess, earliest like comic book memories? Because I have to imagine, um, or like what was access to comics like for you growing up?
Okay, I don't remember what age I was, but
Sure.
I'm guessing it was between 4 and 6 or
Okay.
something like that. So I mean, comics were always around me, so like I always had exposure to them, and
Mm-hmm.
I was lucky enough to have all kinds of comics, maybe except for Japanese and like Far Eastern stuff. But I had contact to European comics, American comics, Italian, like fumetti type westerns and everything, all that kind of stuff. But the thing is, like, the first visual memory that I have is like I was in this room of in my nanny's house when we were really small, and on the floor there were a bunch of comics and all
Mm-hmm.
kinds of comics, like Italian westerns, some American stuff, and all kinds of stuff. And I couldn't even read, but I would look at the images, and it was fascinating to me. So that's where it's all started, I guess.
Mm-hmm.
I got poisoned back then.
Do you remember anything were you reading just a lot of just random stuff, or like when do you maybe remember following something along kind of issue to issue?
Mm. I mean, okay, yeah. I mean, I loved everything. I looked at
Right.
everything and all kind of stuff. But the first thing that I probably started actually reading and trying to follow and like enjoy was Conan the Barbarian. It was
Okay.
very popular in Turkey when I was growing up. There were
Mm-hmm.
all kinds of publications of the Savage Sword of Conan and the Barbarian stuff, but it was like a bit sporadic. Like sometimes I would find later issues, sometimes earlier issues. But Conan was ideal for that. You didn't really need to follow a story arc, or like you didn't need to read from 1 until 100 or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
So it was a good starting point for me. But a little further on, I started reading other stuff. Like I was a big fan of Asterix and Tintin as well. My brother as well. He was also into comics, and we were like reading each other's stuff and things like that. So that was my starting point, I would say.
Mm-hmm. Nice. Okay, so you start getting into art. You go through school. You do all that. Um, you mentioned setting up websites and to kind of get your art out there. Early on, how did you feel? When did it feel like your stuff was starting to break through, in a sense of, again, because like and we'll get to it, but you're one of the, I would say, like a smaller group of creators whose first real major work was independent work, as opposed to potentially coming up through the ranks doing short stories at Marvel or DC and then working up to some of the bigger stuff and maybe making the jump. So kind of before all that, and before we talk about Dynamo 5, when did you really kind of feel that, okay, people are starting to resonate with my work, and here's where I think I need to go with it?
I mean, I have an answer for this, but I mean, the thing is, it's funny because as an artist, I live such an isolated life,
Right.
that I really don't know how much my work reaches people. But I guess in the real sense, the first breakthrough that I had was with Dynamo 5 from Image Comics,
Yeah.
which was my big main breakout moment with Jay Ferber back in about 2006, 2007 or so.
Right.
And that's when I noticed people were actually noticing. I was getting messages and and telling me like they read the book and they enjoyed it, they liked my work and stuff like that. So that's when I actually was realizing this was happening, and I actually broke in, as they would say. So that's I guess my big moment for me.
What would you say you feel were some really kind of formative learning moments during your time on Dynamo 5? Like, what is something that maybe like kind of hit you head on and like, oh, this is what working in comics is like?
I was reliable from the start, I would say.
Sure.
So I think I was doing okay going in, but once since we started working on the books before they come out,
Right.
obviously, so I didn't realize that that I was on a deadline or whatever. I was just
Sure.
doing the work. It didn't actually reach people yet. So a bit later on, when the book came out, like a few issues in, I realized that actually I have to keep up with this for a long time. And oh, okay, now it's serious. So, and I have to experiment, I have to learn on the job. So
Right.
I did comics before, but every page is some learning experience, I feel.
Mm-hmm.
So with every issue, with every page and panel, I was learning and going forward and hopefully growing as an artist. So I guess a few issues in, with Dynamo 5, I realized, okay, this is for real. I have to take this seriously now. Yeah.
What would you say were some of your early influences at that point that you felt like you were not trying to necessarily emulate, obviously, doing your own way, but just even in understanding page design and storytelling and things like that? What were some of those early influences?
By that time, my earliest influences were probably losing their effect on me, who were like John Buscema, Jim Lee,
Sure.
Adam Hughes. These were the biggest three people, I guess, who had the biggest influence on me. But I was probably getting over the emulating phase of these artists.
Right.
So I was trying to find my own voice, but I was also very highly inspired by Brian Hitch's work during that time because he was doing the Ultimates and everything, and I was really impressed with all that stuff. So I was probably pouring some of that knowledge that I absorbed from his pages onto what I was trying to do.
Mm-hmm.
But not necessarily consciously, but
Right.
because I enjoyed it, I guess I wanted to show it on the paper as well.
Yeah. Well, you mentioned the kind of stepping out of a more emulating phase and really trying to define. I guess for those who maybe are listening or maybe young artists and trying to figure this out, what can you elaborate a little bit on what that kind of looks like, as opposed to is it, as far as the emulating goes, is it more things like poses and things like that, or is it Is it panel layout? Like, how do you kind of consciously say, okay, this is what I would normally do, but I'm going to change it up here? So what does that look like?
Um, I, I think learning from copying as an artist who is aspiring to become like a pro and whatever is okay to study, to earn, to learn, and to experiment. But like I got over that pretty early on, and what I wanted to do was I wanted to understand what these people I'm inspired by are doing and how they're doing it, and trying to understand how they were thinking on their pages and whatever, and layouts. And so I wanted to get into the foundation of what they were doing so that I could use that on my own, instead of just like looking and, like trying to do the same on my end. I mean, I'm sure like there were points where I probably came too close to some other influences that I had or whatever, but it was never like I just want to do the same as this. I just always wanted to understand how they do it, and make it into something that I enjoy doing myself, and like trying to reach an outcome as an amalgamation of all the influence of all the influences that I had.
Mm-hmm. So once you're doing you're on Dynamo 5, and for you, as far as obviously wanting to continue this as a career and things like that, do you start to pitch for projects, or did offers start to come in based off the stuff that you were doing on Dynamo 5?
It's more the latter, because I think I've always had a very fortunate career. From the start, I did my part. I tried to show my work all around, and I wanted to reach people, get in contact, and and do all that kind of stuff. But like once I started working, doing stuff, like it started back in digital webbing. Some people reached out to me and asked if I wanted to do a short story or a cover or a pinup and stuff like that. And that always led to bigger stuff, so all that stuff led to Dynamo 5. So Jay reached out to me. He saw that I was reliable. He asked a few people around, like Ryan Otley was doing Invincible by then, but we were friends from digital webbing. And so he asked Ryan, is this guy good? Is he reliable? And thankfully he said some good stuff about me.
Right.
So that's why I landed with Dynamo 5 in a way. And I guess people at Marvel saw that, like I was doing this. They thought it was cool. CB reached out to me, so that led to some Marvel work. So like doing that kind of stuff led to other work. And, I guess all my previous work became a reference for what I was going to do in the future. So I was lucky enough never to actually have any breaks between all of this stuff. Sometimes it became like a burden because it was a bit overwhelming.
Right.
But, can't complain.
Yeah, I mean, sure. I mean, like it's anyone who just kind of looks at your work, even chronologically, like you hit the ground running, and like not only did you hit the ground running, but like you did a number of like you were involved in some pretty high profile stuff. Nova, correct me if I'm wrong, was kind of your first Marvel thing. So now you're doing something that is work for hire. And you're working with a writer who, I mean, did you know, like, did you guys know each other when you had started, or like what? Can you walk me through some of that early process and how much of that maybe was a shock to the system of how you were used to working on Dynamo?
It was all a shock, because I don't know how it would be to someone living in the U.S., for example, but where I was in Turkey, in Ankara, there was nobody around, not maybe many friends who were interested in this stuff, let alone, working in the industry or somebody who could talk to me about this. So everything was new for me. Everything was something of a new experience. So I was pinching myself every time something new happened. Like every time I got a new job offer, every time I collaborated with a new writer and stuff like that. It always was something new and exciting. So I didn't know anybody back then.
Right.
So it was, and being a very introverted person, I was actually most of the time very shy and almost afraid of all the stuff that I was gonna do.
Right.
But you had to soldier on. So I did, and it was very exciting. As you said, Nova was my first work with Marvel, which was not a very big project, but the next thing that I did was a She-Hulk one-shot book with Peter David, who was like one of my biggest writer idols back then, because of all the Hulk stuff and everything. So that was really a bit of what do you call it? That starstruck moment for me. Okay, I'm working with Mr. David, so yeah, I was pretty excited, So I tried to put my best foot forward.
So even in doing that, right? Like, what are some of the initial kind of reactions, right? Because like you went from doing Dominant Defenders, like, oh great, now I'm working for Marvel or DC. Is it? Do you feel like you have made it at that point, or do you feel like, oh crap, I've got a long way to go?
It was a mix of both, because literally I was getting published through Marvel and DC, and
right.
So I came to accept it that I made it and I'm doing this. But the thing is, like, the fear never went away, especially in the early days, that this might be my last job, so I have to do the best thing that I can so I can get the next job.
Right.
So it was scary. Everything I did, I had to put 100% in. Deadlines would be tight. Breaking in. They don't give you the biggest projects sometimes. So you have to do some grunt work.
Sure.
So, but it was all fun. It was all an experience and learning and getting to know the business. So. Mm-hmm. It was very exciting, and also scary.
Well, so then, I mean, so you did some of that early stuff at Marvel, but then you spent a pretty good chunk of time doing some DC work. And so, was there a did you feel kind of the Marvel DC rivalry, like when you're working on a bunch of DC stuff, like is that like, do you does the sense of pride of like, oh, like, yeah, DC is better than Marvel or whatever, like does that kind of hit you at any point, or is it just like, I'm doing what I love, it doesn't matter?
At that point I was like, I was accepting the idea of being a professional, so like,
sure,
it was all a job, so I wasn't, getting any personal, biases towards all that stuff. But I did realize the rivalry between the companies,
right?
Because and I actually feel I probably benefited from that, because when I started doing the Marvel work, that led DC to understand that I was doing good work and stuff. So they offered me a substantial, new project, which was the New 52 Supergirl.
Right.
And, after started doing that, Marvel actually said, okay, this guy is getting probably a bit more popular now. Maybe we should, entice him to work for us again. Yeah. So, I bounced back and forth. So I guess, that was good for my career, I would say.
Right. Well, right. Because I forget, like, so during that New 52 era, right? Like, that was when both publishers they were signing a bunch of exclusives, right? Like you were in, and it really kind of felt like, not necessarily that there was a line in the sand, but like there was almost a creative arms race in a sense on who was working where and who was putting out big events and things like that. And so it really felt like that period of comics, and I'm waxing a bit nostalgic here, but like really felt like a very fun time. But I mean, the Supergirl project you did was like, that was no small project, right? Like that was something that where you really got to make your mark on a character that was, for what the New 52 was, reintroducing a bunch of these classic characters in a way. How do you approach that book, knowing the program it was a part of? And like, what do you remember what some of the things were that you wanted to do in an effort to, leave your mark on that run?
Oh yeah, that yeah, I felt the responsibility starting that work, because it was a new launch,
Mm-hmm.
and it was, like probably the biggest thing that I did in the big two companies until that point. And it was a really secret big stuff that was going to happen with DC. Like I don't think they have done something like that in a very long time at
Right.
least, and so it was gonna be very newsworthy. So
Mm-hmm.
so I was very excited, and I knew this was an opportunity for me. So I was trying to do my best, but the thing is, things were shaky. There was a lot of moving pieces and things like that. So we had a different writer beginning out, and they couldn't, make it work. So like the stuff that we had to do, we had to throw out. They brought in new writers, or whatever,
Mm-hmm.
and it was a lot of adjusting and learning, and trying to adapt to what was going on real fast. But it worked out, and like I'm usually a very easy person to work with. I feel
Mm-hmm.
so. Like we never had any problems in our book, but a lot of problems were with some different New 52 books. A lot of creative
Mm-hmm.
teams were moving around. Like every couple of issues, people were moving around.
Right.
But we stuck to our guns, and like all our crew, we stuck with the project, and we did our best, and it was real good.
Mm-hmm.
I felt it was very exciting.
So working on a big, very, a shared universe project like Supergirl, you mentioned, there was a bit of a tumultuous time where, yes, there were a bunch of people moving around. Did how did having to deal necessarily with a shared universe impact some of the stuff that you were doing, and were you kind of like ready for it? Like, was it one of those things where you guys wanted to use a character somewhere but couldn't, but maybe did somewhere, and then plans changed? Like, what was that kind of like for you?
Mm. I guess we were one of the lucky ones. We didn't get really that negatively affected by any of
Sure.
the hecticness, I would say.
Right.
We were. It was fairly easy. We had like a Superman cameo, and like other stuff happening a bit later on when things were settling
Mm-hmm.
down. So, but we were in our own relatively small bubble. I mean, contained bubble in Supergirl. So we didn't have much trouble, I would
Right.
say, and so we didn't have any adaptation issues.
Mm.
But so yeah, it was a good time. Yeah.
Well, you also got to work on the costume, in a sense,
Yeah,
right?
yeah. I mean, I tried my hand. I gave a few designs and whatever. While we were working on it, we couldn't finalize it. During that time, there was a writer change on Supergirl before, of
Right.
course, launch and scripts and whatever. During that time, Jim Lee worked on most of the main
He did a
costumes.
bunch of them.
So he came up with the costume actually.
Mm-hmm.
So what I did was just tweak it a little bit,
Yeah.
to suit my style, and make a few small changes so it would be a little bit of my own as well.
Right.
So
Right. What
yeah.
do you feel makes a good practical superhero costume design?
Hmm. I feel a little bit more old school about this. A lot of modern costumes are usually getting very detailed. A lot of like stuff get added to it, like jackets. Like real life, like maybe baggier pants or whatever, or
Sure.
boots and things like that. I think they're all amazing, and a lot of people are doing really amazing designs. But when it comes to superheroes, like I feel personally that it should have this sense of like a bit of like uh, uh, the old school like the tights and pants kind of stuff.
Right.
It has to have that a little bit. And I feel, of course, the old the idea of having a good silhouette for the character is
Mm.
important. So I try to keep that in mind always. Like even if it's just with the hair shape or whatever. Like when you look at it, you can make it really understandable. And
Sure.
I try to keep the designs comparatively simple and modern in a
Mm.
sense. So that's what I usually have in my mind. So
Mm.
it's also easier to work in. You know,
Right.
when you have tight deadlines, you don't want to like do all the laces on a boot or whatever.
Right.
Instead of just doing a straight boot.
So did you also then just to kind of keep on the through line of just costume design and things like that, design the Jean Grey costume for X-Men Red?
Yeah, I did all the costumes for the X-Men Red book. We did.
So
Jean
I guess
Grey.
so. What were some of the things that you wanted to make sure that you kind of hit there? Because that's a costume that I love, and I think it's such a mix of classic and contemporary in a sense, that I'd love to hear kind of your thought process on things that maybe you feel like you nailed with it, and then were there some things that you threw out as you were designing it? What was that like?
Yeah, there were a few back and forths. The only editorial input that I got was that they wanted to have something inspired by the '90s Jim Lee
Sure.
X-Men Blue, X-Men Red, no, X-Men Gold era Jean Grey costume as maybe like a basis. So that was my main inspiration going in,
Mm-hmm.
and I wanted to put in the other ideas that I had. Change the colors, add some shapes, make it streamlined, a bit more modern.
Mm-hmm.
Also simple, but the thing is, I wanted the team to have a unified look. So like that's
Right.
what I wanted to keep, even if there was color differences or whatever. I wanted each character to look their own, but also unified when they're together.
Mm-hmm.
So like, I had a great time doing that, especially with Nightcrawler. I wanted to keep his old black and red costume, but
Yeah.
I made it in the new style that I was doing for the book.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, that was the main idea, I would say.
Nice. Love that. All right. So after your stint on DC, you do a bunch of then inevitably jump into a ton of X-Men work. Like you make your home with the X-Men in a number of different ways over these next couple of years. But the first where you land first is with Jason, who inevitably we're going to talk about later. You're doing something Bug Wars with and things like that. So Wolverine and the X-Men that book was such a different X-Men book than the X-Men books had been at the time. Given the relationship that you and Jason have now, and how long has it's been, what was working with early Jason like?
The only thing that we did with Jason before Conan was actually the Thor book, the Thor Generations book.
Oh, right. Yep.
So that was fun. That was great because I loved his work on Thor.
Mm-hmm.
And I wanted to work with him. I don't remember how it got to be, but I think I was working on Wolverine and the X-Men after Jason
Yep.
did his run on it,
Yep.
and I think I met Jason in Lucca in Italy at the convention.
Okay.
And we had a good time, and I mentioned to him I wanted to work with him and stuff like that, and I think after this point that I got to work with him on the tour book,
Right.
So yeah, I get confused. As I said, my memory is not the best, but yeah, so it was around that time, So,
Right.
but it was I love this tour work. So
Mm-hmm.
getting to work on that book, that one shot, with Jane and Thor together, and it was a blast. I had a great time.
Yeah.
And,
So in doing that though, I have to imagine like the early days of working with Jason on something like that is almost especially with someone that you inevitably will work with again and really kind of find a beat with, is almost kind of like dating. It feels like. What you've worked with a bunch of other writers, obviously, up until the point where then you start doing Conan with him and things like that. What was it? When did you begin to feel you and Jason really start to click and have like maybe a shorthand with one another, or really get to feel comfortable in throwing ideas back and forth or things like that? Like, does that come early in the Conan stuff, or do you feel like it maybe came a little bit more midway through?
I would say, Jason was always very generous and open with his work, with his collaboration,
Sure.
with me. So he was very kind. so I would say it came a bit early, though I was never, like I never stuck my nose in his job, and
Sure.
he never actually, said, do this, do change that or whatever. So like I understood what he wanted, and I guess it was very easy to convey on paper. And that's what I really enjoyed, like I guess the way I enjoyed his work also translates to working with him. And I really had a blast reading his scripts, and it came really easy and flowed really, easily. So there was never an issue. So as soon as we started working on Conan, it was like it felt like we were meant to do this. I was a big fan of Conan. He was also a big fan of Conan, and like doing this together. Okay, I said, this is the best that I could get right now. So we try to enjoy it a lot.
Nice. So you have worked, like I said, you've worked with a bunch of different writers over the course of your career. What for you? What is what would you say are some key things when it comes to collaboration for you, no matter who you inevitably end up working with? Like, what are some of the baselines that you feel kind of have to get set before you can really dive into some work with someone?
Well, I mean, as I said, I'm pretty easy to work with,
Right.
so I'm very adaptable. So I usually don't cause problems, or
Sure.
I don't be a diva or anything usually. And I understand what I'm doing, especially if I'm working for a bigger company, for hired stuff. I'm there to do one thing, which is to actually put the script into pages, as an artist. So I understand my position. So when I get to work with somebody, I try to understand how they want to do this, and usually I was very lucky. I worked with very nice people, and they were always very open and very collaborative, and always very accommodating as well, in terms of what they wanted to do, and they always asked what I wanted to do as well. So it came easy, and everybody was very generous with me. But like, I mean, the thing is, like, what I care about most is, like, I don't want the script to be very restrictive. And I don't want it to be too specific. Like, that's, I feel some of it, this is my job. So like,
Right.
I don't want the writer to do everything in like in detail on the script. So like,
Sure.
I want to do, because I want the flexibility of doing.
Yeah, you don't want the script to be draw by numbers, basically.
Right. Yeah. I mean, I there was this one job a bit earlier in my career that the script I found very, very constricting. Like, it was this every panel, everything, it was describing the motions, from this panel to the other one, and there's like even mention of certain number of objects on the pages, which were irrelevant to the story. So so I found that very, like, almost annoying, and very disruptive to my workflow. So thankfully that never happened again, and obviously I feel like every professional writer already understands that, and when they're collaborating, they're open to working with others, so I never had any problems.
Right. I like that. At one point in your stint at Marvel, you get selected to be a part of the Marvel Young Guns. And in that class, it's yourself, it's Dave Marquez, Valeria Sheedy, Sarah Pichelli, Nick Bradshaw, and Ryan Stegman. For you, I have to imagine that's a giant ass spotlight on you, because I mean, that's a program that is like, hey, here are the artists that you need to be looking out for this year. They're going to work on some big stuff. Can you tell me what your reaction was to saying, like, hey, we're gonna include you as part of this program. Here's what it means. Were you ready for it?
I think I was, like,
Sure.
at that point, like, I was confident, like, I was, I understood that I'm now part of the family of the Marvel group, and, like, I was
Right.
under contract and everything. And when this happened, it really made me happy, personally happy, because it felt like like I was being appreciated as an artist, and a spotlight was being put on me. So like I really appreciated that, and I wanted to make the best out of it. Like I wanted to use this opportunity, and show this as a positive thing for artists. So I found that very flattering. So it was really, really great experience. Like I was very happy, and but also a bit stressful. Like okay, so now people are gonna look a bit more, probably critically towards my stuff.
Right.
And there were a lot of great artists coming from the Young Guns, school of artists from before, and like I had to live up to those names as well. So
Sure.
yeah, I took it, very seriously.
I love that. Who would you say maybe during that period of time was, from an artist standpoint, maybe pushing you, made you want to push yourself to be even better, or to do the best work that you can?
I would say my peers, like guys like Valerio, like Ryan, Mike Del Mundo.
Yep.
These guys who became like very nice, very good friends of mine, and these guys, like I wanted to be as good as them, if and not, like get stay behind. And of course, like I was looking at my inspirations, other people like Stuart Immonen and Olivier Coipel, and like some bigger artists, I mean older artists from before. So like I wanted to reach the next level, and not get left behind.
Awesome. All right, so let's move on to Bug Wars. When does the idea for Bug Wars start to percolate with you and Jason? Because I know you guys have mentioned when the book was announced and things like that like this is a project that you guys have been working on for a real long time. But when did the idea hit, and what was it? Was it a Jason pitch to you saying, "Hey, I've got the story idea, and here it is," or was it, "Hey, let's work on something together and we'll figure it out"?
I mean, I guess I was the one who first said. I guess this was during the pandemic or around that time. I said to Jason, I think I'm gonna like not renew my contract, and I want to do something creator own. If you ever feel like it, I love working with you. I'd like to do something more. If you feel like it, let me know if you have something of an idea or whatever. Mm-hmm. So that was the initial, like some. So it goes about 5 years or so back, and a little bit later on, Jason said, "Okay, I have this idea." He said, "You want to talk about it?" I said, "Yeah, sure." So he pitched me the idea of Bug Wars. He probably talked to you about this already. So
well, sure.
So
I do want to go back just to a point that you had mentioned where you basically said, "I'm not going to renew my contract. I want to do something creator owned." Why was that important for you?
Thing is, like, I really enjoy working for the Big Two or whatever, because like I grew up with these characters. I love them. I love the X-Men. Sure. I love all that kind of stuff, and it's always fun. And the thing is, I don't want to be remembered as just a guy who was, like, as a mercenary in a way. So, or just a guy that drew whatever or something like that. Instead, like I would also like to be known, at least to have in my portfolio of works, of my career, something of my own. Like this guy made this book. It's this Bug Wars is by Jason and Mahmud, and like Dynamo 5 by Jay and Mahmud and stuff like that. So I really understand that this is something not for everybody maybe, but it is important for me, and I at least want to have something that I want to leave behind, that is something of my own, so, and this is probably why I started making comics, to make my own stuff and tell my own stories in some way with maybe others, but something that we built, something from the ground up, with nothing, maybe aside from inspirations, with nothing from behind, just.
Mm-hmm. What was your initial reaction to Jason's Bug Wars pitch?
When he was first talking about it, I thought it was a cool idea. But of course, being a professional artist, and I started really imagining the stuff that I had to draw. So it's not like, oh, okay, like there's this armies of ants and whatever they're fighting and stuff. Like he's like telling me all this. Oh, that's cool. Wait, I have to draw like a million ants. And so like, I don't know how to draw an ant face. So I'm also calculating these ideas when I'm talking to him. So when he was saying all these stuff, I loved the idea, but I was also hesitant and scared, and I had some I don't know, trepidations and stuff like that, because okay, if I say yes to this, then I know that it's going to be a lot of work,
right?
And so it's going to take me a lot of time, more than normal, because like I have to research a lot of things, I have to learn a lot of things. And I'm not really too comfortable with bugs normally. so learning all this stuff, and like getting into all the bugs and everything, insect life was gonna be a daunting experience. But I never ran away from all this stuff, and I actually like challenges in my work, so it was a good opportunity.
Yeah. So what kind of research outside of just what do bugs look like kind of goes into something like this?
I mean, yeah, that's a good point. Because it's just not like, see, I have a bunch of books over here. They're all bug books now. They're all close by, and they're great for reference. They're like all kinds of stuff and all kinds of information, and like you get all the scientific information. Right. But when you're trying to tell a story with insects, then you have to think about other stuff. Like you have to think about how these guys move, how do they, interact, how they eat, whatever, their behaviors, and how to convey this. Okay, I know how to draw a guy who's running. I know how to draw maybe a horse running, or a dog, sitting, or whatever. These are things that I'm more familiar with, but I don't know what a bug does, when he's running, okay, we see it, but how do I draw it? It's not got like two legs, one, you can't do it like a human. You have to do it in a certain way that it appears it's moving faster, so there was a lot of different types of ideas, that I had to come up with and, understand and bring new language to what I was doing on the pages.
So do you have a favorite bug now?
Okay. Yeah, they're all interesting. I think I like bees a lot.
Okay.
Bees, and from bugs.
So like honeybees or like yellow jackets, right? Because now we're talking about different bees now.
I think there are tons. I'm still learning. Like I was looking. There are too many kinds. But I'm not sure. Yeah, the bumblebees, I guess.
Yeah, the fat little furry ones.
Favorite, even before this book.
Yeah,
they're cute. So those are the ones. But when it comes to beetles and stuff, all the stag beetles and all the ones with the big pincers and everything, those are really impressive and very cool looking. Right. Also very fun to draw.
What would you say is probably one of the cooler bug facts that you've learned in doing this?
Cool ones? I'm not so sure if there is anything cool.
Okay, so this project has not endeared bugs to you at all. They're still weird, still creepy, and they need to stay far away. Is what I feel.
No,
like I'm learning.
Seriously though, I've changed a lot of my perspective. In the past couple of years towards insects and bugs. I understand and respect them much more, and
sure.
I like them more. I would say, but what I meant was. By cool is like that they're so scary actually, imagine, because we're dealing with this every day now, like sure. Imagine being small and encountering this giant thing in front of you that can do anything, they can split you in half, or
right,
spit acid from their butts onto your face and you could melt off, or a spider could entangle you and whatever. So, it's all very interesting. But, I guess in terms of being cool, I guess the spiders are, like, on top,
Right.
they're the coolest, like
Yeah.
with all the webs and stuff,
Yeah. And so in doing this, now you're mixing, right? So like, the pitch that you guys have used a whole bunch of this is Honey, I Shrunk the Kids meets Game of Thrones, right? And so you're
Right.
able to bring a lot of the big action that you've done with Conan on this. What is it any different when your hero is using a giant axe to slice off humanoids or whatever than it is like trying to slice into a bug?
Yeah, it is. It is. It's different. The thing is like, yeah, again, you have to understand and learn about all these bugs and how they move and how they
Right.
are connected and like how they are shaped and stuff. So what happens if you cut like off an arm of a bug or a leg? I mean, and does it bleed? What comes out? So you have to think about all this stuff. So yeah, it is different, and also more time consuming, as
Sure.
like when you're dealing with a man versus like like another humanoid or whatever. You have just like four limbs and a head, but that's it. When it's a insect, it's got like six legs minimum,
Right.
wings, wing outer wings, like antlers and whatever, like feelers, all kind of stuff. So
Yeah.
you have a lot of appendages and things.
I love it. There, you're also in this book dealing with two different scales, right? Like you've got the shrunk down world that is the ground level, the bug world, and whatever. But you're also dealing with the real world. And so, are there any things that you need to take into consideration as you're kind of going from like one to the other? Like, how do you manage the scale of that in those two worlds as an artist?
Yeah, the key word there is scale,
Yeah.
literally. When we're in the real world, it's like usual deal, so you
Sure.
draw and convey things the way that you do, like in any comic or a movie or stuff, so you use the standard angles and everything. But when it comes to the shrunk down world of the insects and everything, then you have to play with scale and you have to convey how things are in relation to other stuff, so, and that's one of the fun parts, I would say, especially if the two worlds collide, if we see a real, like actual sized person compared to one of those mites, the small people that are in our stories, are next to each other. When we see that, then it becomes enjoyable, especially as an artist, because you
Right.
see this giant foot and you see these tiny people around and stuff.
Yeah.
So yeah, scale is the key word, I would say.
I think, but you're also even in the smaller world dealing with scales of the bugs themselves, right? Because
Sure.
like there are still smaller bugs that are still, I guess maybe in your world cat sized, and like in this world cat sized,
Yeah.
but then there are some that are like rhino sized or elephant sized. How do you even because like one of the things that I love about your work is the sense of detail that you put into this. And so even when you're dealing with fantastic beings like this, how do you make sure that even when you're showing that scale, how to like when to go a bit more intricate and when to not, and why is that important?
Yeah, it's really difficult to manage that in this series, because everything seems so detailed, like all these bugs and everything. So yeah, I would say again, scale is the key word here. So like the stuff I try to convey things in, like in depth. So like there's foreground stuff try to put in the middle ground stuff and the background stuff. So of course, when there's so much detail going on, you have to consider a lot of stuff when conveying that in lines and shapes and spots and everything like that. So yeah, it's a game of balancing, and
Yeah.
it's really easy to get lost because it can get very intricate. Like getting all to draw all these bugs, and
Sure.
you have to stop somewhere.
Yeah.
And I find myself more often than not getting a magnifying glass on top of my paper, and like trying to
I love
like
that.
add in more legs into the the small tiny insect in the behind, or things like that.
I think one of the things that something like Honey, I Shrunk the Kids, just using that as a point of reference, does for people in realizing, like, if you're going to get shrunk down to bug sized, is just even basic things, right? Like how tall blades of grass are, right?
Oh yeah.
In that. And so I imagine in this world, those things are almost like can be considered skyscrapers in certain instances.
Sure.
What would you say maybe was there something that you felt was the hardest thing to get the scale right, or are you the kind who's like super methodical about it, and you're doing the math to figure out, okay, a 6-inch blade of grass is actually going to be this tall
Right.
in this world?
Yeah, this was actually something before, during the start of our project, like when we were still discussing stuff. This was one of the topics that we spoke a lot about with Jason, like how small are these going to be, like, and how big is everything going to be compared to them and whatever. And so we went a lot of back and forth, like we agreed on certain stuff, but we agreed on being a bit flexible with this, like, because it's really difficult to keep everything consistent at some point. So sometimes some bugs might appear a bit larger than maybe they would compared to others, or like the figures might be smaller or bigger and stuff like that. So as long as it serves the story, we didn't really get hung up on all the extreme details. So unless there's probably like a professional entomologist who is interested in what's going on in our book, I guess we're okay. Like we shouldn't have much problems with all this stuff.
Right. Oh, I love that. So obviously, with this being a creator-owned book for you, in a sense, the level of obviously the level of ownership is that it's yours, but I have to imagine the level of emotional investment is a lot higher. Not that you're not emotionally invested in a lot of the work for hire stuff, but as you're creating this world, right? Because now, like, you are creating a world from scratch. In this instance, you are creating characters from scratch. Are there characters that you've really felt that, like, maybe you've gotten really attached to and close with, whether it's through the story or through drawing, and how is that experience maybe a little different than, say, working with Wolverine in a book?
I think it's, as you said, since everything we made here is our own, everything has more gravity, and we care more about everything that we do. So I want it to be good. Like, it's not like the same when you're working for work for hire, when you're this, like, even there you get asked to create stuff sometimes, which is amazing. And you put your best work in that as well. Right. But maybe you don't have the same attachment as that over here, because this is yours and you're putting something on from yourself. And this is a very personal story for Jason, because it's from his background and growing up as a kid and everything. And he's got stuff and from him and probably his family as well. And the same goes for me. I think, especially with the main character in our first story, Slade Slaymaker. Funny thing is, like, now that I'm a father and my son is like 13 years old, and Slade is 15, it's very close. Like, I kind of, like, was inspired by his looks in terms of, like, referencing my son a little bit. But also, I see a lot of him in there, but I also see a lot of me in there, because like, I remember my childhood and my experiences, because his personality is not that different from what I was like, growing up and stuff. So it's a weird situation. Sometimes it's like, okay, this feels like something that I lived, and then I noticed, like, oh, this is what my son is going through right now. So there is this personal side of it. And this is one of the things that I love about working on this book and with Jason, because Jason, despite having all this crazy story about all these bugs and everything, and like all the Game of Thrones craziness going on, at the center of the story is this family, and everything has so much heart in it, and and that's what I really care about in a comic book, and what I want to do. I want to do something epic, but I want, the main thing about it should be the stuff that we care about the characters and their interactions with each other.
Right. That's awesome. What are some key components, I guess, to today's teen fashion, in a sense? Like, what have you mentioned kind of like looking to them, looking to your own son as influence and things like that. But I have to imagine even then, to try and make this as contemporary as possible, but also make it a bit evergreen and timeless. What are the kids wearing today?
Okay, yeah, I suck at this kind of stuff. So like, so when something like this happens, I usually go to my wife. I ask, what do the kids wear these days? Like, what would a 20-year-old wear? What would a 15-year-old wear? Or something like that. So that's the kind of thing. Like, I mean, to be fair, in our story, in the first story, we don't see too many people aside from the main family.
Sure.
Which are a certain type of people, so
mm-hmm.
I didn't have to go too deep in terms of fashion, I would say. But,
right. That's great.
If I'm in trouble, I usually go to my wife.
I love it. So what is something that you hope fans really kind of take away as they dive into this world for the first couple of issues in Bug Wars?
Sincerely, I really hope that when somebody's going through this, I hope they feel some sort of excitement and certain sense of discovery, because this is what I feel when doing this book, and it brings me back to my enjoyment of comics as a kid growing up, and the stuff that I really enjoyed, something new that was not like what we encountered really before, something familiar also, but as a world where you could discover a lot of different things and everything. So I hope they get something like that, because I really enjoyed doing this book in that sense, and just developing this world, creating something new on every page, is discovering different areas and different cultures in the story and different, mm-hmm. Clans and everything. That sense of discovery and, and excitement and enjoyment, and also, some sort of passion, I do hope, sincerely, some people at least would, get something like that out of it.
Right. Outside of all of this, your life as an artist and all that, what are some things you do just to unwind? What does... I know, you're obviously very busy, and so I'm sure free time is limited these days, and whether balancing being a dad and a husband and a comic book artist or whatever. But what do you do to unwind?
Okay, the easy go-to answer is like gaming. I've been a gamer for my whole life, I would say.
What are you playing?
So it's my meditation. It changes right now. What am I playing? I have a group of friends. We're playing Apex Legends.
Okay.
So it's just very...
You get in, you get out, the game is what
Absolutely,
it is.
Yeah.
Totally
it's very
get it.
Stress relief. But personally, I really enjoy story-driven games,
Sure.
Like The Last of Us, Red Dead Redemption 2, mm-hmm. and things like that. So like the Baldur's Gate 3 game, I really was fascinated by, and I still want to go back to it when I have the time, So.
Right.
And things like that. But other than that, when I have time, if I can create time for myself, I like to take photographs, so like I'm trying to do the street photography kind of thing, just for my personal enjoyment,
Sure.
Going back to that. And if I have more time, I like to paint, which is not too different from what I do, but still
Sure.
paint for myself,
Right. What does painting for yourself look like? Is it just what are the subjects there?
It's usually as I don't go like all artsy, but like but like I just want to draw something that I enjoy and for myself, with nobody asking me to do something. Like if there's a cartoon, maybe I'll watch the one, maybe an anime character. It could be that, or it could be just like something from a movie or something like just a image from. For example, I like a movie that the visuals I really enjoy, like The Lighthouse, for example, by Robert Eggers. I want to draw like a character or something from there, and like paint the lights and shadows or whatever. So it's like experimentation, learning, and like just getting enjoyment and the creative juices flowing, I would say.
Nice. I hear you on the Apex Legends front. I just got so sucked into Marvel Rivals lately that it has taken over my free time life there. If I have free time, I'm playing.
Is it good? I heard it.
Oh man, it is a blast. Like I loved Overwatch, but there is just something special in it. Like the Marvel characters really do kind of make the game, I think, that much better in a sense. Last question I've got for you, and I may have a spin out for this, so don't you're not totally off the hook yet. One of the things that I do at the end of these episodes is I ask who I'm talking to if you were to suggest someone to read something that is in your minds everything perfect of what a comic could be. What are you suggesting them?
Okay, difficult question because I do have a go-to answer.
Sure.
You
can pick multiple. That's fine.
Right.
We're giving people reading lists here. That's what we're doing.
Okay. This is my ultimate comic book thing. It's like I would say go get Akira, read it. Like Katsuro Otomo. Mm-hmm. That's my like ultimate thing. It's like the pinnacle for me. There are better stuff, probably yes. There are better entry points, or like maybe a general better comic than that. But
sure.
It is one of the best ever, I feel.
What is it? What is it about that really speaks to you? Was it more when you read it and it's more formative, or is it something that is that a thing where like maybe you go back to time and time again and you're inspired every time you read it?
It's more like the latter, but I have a weird relationship with it because like I actually didn't read the comic until maybe 10 years ago or something.
Okay,
like something like that. I of course watched the movie when it came out in
sure.
89 or something, probably 88, 89, something like that. I loved it, but I thought it was just a really well made anime and whatever. And then over time I came to understand more about Katsuro Otomo's work, and I got more exposure to the comic, and I had the comics, but I never had the opportunity to read them. So like when my son was born, I started reading them. Every time I would have to wake up at night or whatever.
Sure.
I started reading a little bit and stuff like that. So I had that kind of weird connection over there.
Okay.
But my fascination to the book grew exponentially since then. So every time I think about something really epic, my mind goes there. It's such a fascinating thing, and the way he did it, and all the story behind it is also very interesting to me. How young he was when doing that and everything, and it's mind-boggling how accomplished he was right from this, from the beginning until
right.
Until now. So yeah.
Okay, so Akira, that's your go-to recommendation?
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah. I love it. It's interesting you mentioned that because I feel like we've seen such a rise in the popularity of manga, right? In that I have to imagine at some point, and I feel like we're even beginning to see it now, that style, whether it's storytelling or layout or whatever, is really going to start, and I think influence even some like your traditional American stuff. Is that a fair and accurate statement? And like, because like even when you spoke earlier on, right? Like your influences were the Jim Lees and things like that. And I feel like now with younger artists absorbing stuff. They're not only absorbing, your work potentially, but also there's a lot of manga stuff. And I think we're going to see this not weird, but we're going to see this very unique hybrid. What is it? Maybe this is the question. What is it about that style that you feel has really kind of caught fire with audiences?
I don't really know, but I can understand it because it's it's very very there's something attractive about it.
Right.
It's very easy to get into, very easy to digest. I would feel there's so many different things that you could jump into.
Right.
And it doesn't feel like a chore getting into. I feel because it does. Let's say you find a series, it's not attached to many other stuff or
Right.
like a
You
world
jump
or
in
it's
and keep
not
going.
like a reboot or whatever.
Right.
So it doesn't have the baggage that comes with it. So like Dan Da Dan, for example, it's a anime I recently watched. I'm reading the manga right now. It's totally enjoyable. It's just start from number one, just go read it. And, it takes you on an adventure, and it's
Right.
easy to hop on, hop off, and that's from the reader perspective, I would say. And from the art perspective, I think it's also very effective. They have a very strong visual language, and I mean there is so many variation
Right.
in styles in manga as well. So there's something for everybody. There's something like Naoki Urasawa, one of my biggest influences as an artist. His work is really fascinating, I feel. More realistic, more closer to the Western style of comics, I would say.
Sure.
And then, of course, there's all the chibi and whatever. I don't know all that stuff. Like, I don't want to sound like an old man, so I don't want to get into all that stuff. But there's something for everybody, and I think it's very compelling.
Yeah.
And there's a lot to learn from this, I feel, and maybe the American or Western comics could learn a lot from the success of this.
Awesome. Well, dude, thank you so much for spending some time with me today. Really, I have thoroughly enjoyed this, and I think this is going to be one of those things where if you're listening to this and you have not already picked up Bug Wars #1, I don't know what you're doing. You're missing out on one hell of a good time. It is, look, I know I'm biased, whatever, but this is a book that is 100% going to be on best of lists at the end of the year, like guaranteed. And this is a book that I believe has something for everyone in a sense, but also is it's full of heart, but also the action in this book is so good. It's just so good. So if you're listening, check this out. You can make sure you can follow Mahmud on a whole bunch of different social media platforms. He's everywhere. You can check out all of his art. So Mahmud, thank you again, and I'll talk to you next time, man.
Thank you for having me, man. It was a blast.
And there you have it, another episode of Let's Talk Comics in the can from one of the nicest people in this business. I love Mahmud. I love his work. It's been phenomenal to see how he has evolved as a creator. He is truly, truly one of the best. So make sure, if you haven't yet, pick up Bug Wars. It's going to be one heck of a good time. If you want to hear the flip side to some of those Bug Wars stories, and if you haven't checked out the Jason Aaron episode of Let's Talk Comics yet, I highly suggest you go back and check that one out as well, because that one is also a really good time from another phenomenal person in this business. I did want to take some time to read some, I guess, quote-unquote fan mail for the show. So if you leave a 5-star review on iTunes or you leave a 5-star review on Spotify and leave us a comment, whether it's on an episode or the show in general, and I read it in this part of the show, all you got to do is reach out to me, James at letstalkcomics.com, and I will get the information I need to send a sticker out your way. I got to call out Omega Slice, who I know has been listening to the show and sent some screenshots in, which I appreciate. Now, this one's from the Kyle Higgins episode. 5 stars for sure, just for this chat with Mr. Higgins. Not a reader of the Massive Verse yet, but this was fascinating to hear what it took to get him there. Definitely checking out Gates of Gotham now. Omega Slice, thank you. I know you've been listening to a bunch. I also got a shout out to Miguel Felicio67, who has also been leaving comments. on a number of the different episodes over on Spotify. It's amazing to get to know some of the behind the curtain stuff, specifically when you've been following their creations for a while. So thank you. Really do appreciate all that. So without further ado, I'll send you guys on your way. There's a bunch of, if you haven't checked out any of the older episodes, I highly recommend you do that. If you are listening and you made it this far into the podcast, do me a favor. Just stop what you're doing. Well, don't stop what you're doing. You can continue listening because I'm going to talk for another minute or so. Take a screenshot of the episode and share it with me on Twitter, on Blue Sky, on Instagram, on Facebook, wherever. I don't care. And I will 100% give that a reshare. I love seeing what you guys are listening to, when you're listening to it, how you're listening to it. I've seen folks listen to the show in long car rides. Some folks are listening to it in the gym. Some folks are putting it up because we have the show on YouTube and they're just playing it through their TV while they do some chores. Some are listening to the show while they read comics. I love all of that. So thank you. And yeah, like I said before, head on out to your local comic shop. Go pick up a new book. Go pick up something you didn't think you were going to read this week. And let us know. I'd love to see what you guys are picking up from the comic book shop each week. So maybe we do something a little there where we share some of that as well. I'd love to, if you guys are going to make the extra effort to maybe pick something up that you weren't sure about, I want to know what that is. I want to know what you thought about it, because I think that's really the only way we, can cultivate a nice, fun community around this. Not that there is one. Being in comics is one of the best things ever. So yeah, let me see what you're reading. Because as long as you keep on buying comics, we're going to keep talking about it. So we'll catch you later.